Egun guztioi, buenos días a todos. Vamos a dar inicio a esta tercera sesión del Congreso Elkano'22, Circunnavegando la historia, con una sesión que, yo siendo historiador, nos toca de cerca, pero voy a reconocer desde el principio que, sorprendentemente, y para, vamos a decir, mi desgracia, para reconocer esa carencia mía, me pilla muy lejos y a la vez muy cerca. Voy a comenzar con una pequeña reflexión. Ustedes se imaginan lo siguiente. Mañana se descubre, se hace una rueda de prensa, que se ha descubierto la solución al cáncer. A partir de mañana sabemos cómo acabar con el cáncer y la cantidad de miles de muertes que producen esos cánceres. Hace poco tuvimos la conmemoración del Día del Cáncer de Mama, que a pesar de ser uno de los cánceres menos letales, pues siguen matando a buena parte de la gente que lo sufre. No tanto como otros cánceres, pero sigue siendo letal. Yo digo de cerca porque tengo una familia muy cercana que está sufriendo este cáncer y sabemos lo que es. Pues imagínense lo que sería si nos dijeran que se puede curar. Pero el investigador que hace la noticia de que existe la cura del cáncer se niega a que se aplique. Y además nos dice la explicación. Si apliquemos la cura del cáncer, mi carrera académica está finiquitada. Absurdo, ¿no? Bueno, pues aunque no se lo crean, los que estamos en el mundo académico sabemos que es la realidad, y en el mundo de la historia lo sabemos. Yo cuando empecé la carrera a estudiar historia, me decían mis compañeros, ¿qué estudias? Eso no sirve para nada. La idea de la inutilidad del conocimiento humanístico, del conocimiento histórico, es una de las cosas que están más arraigadas en nuestra sociedad. Curiosamente, en los últimos tiempos estamos viendo cómo la historia está adquiriendo un papel central en los debates de todo tipo, políticos. Si se acuerdan del discurso que hizo Putin el día que comenzó la guerra, bueno, la operación especial contra Ucrania, hace unos pocos meses, aunque parecían años, la argumentación principal que hizo era básicamente la idea de que, bueno, había razones históricas. Aquel territorio al norte de Crimea, Jersón, Donetsk, Donbass, eran la Novorosilla, la nueva Rusia que fue tomada por, no me acuerdo qué zar o qué zarina en el siglo XVIII, y esa era la razón suficiente para justificar una guerra como la que hemos tenido ahora. Y cosas similares hay, y no voy a hablar de pantomimas pseudohistóricas que hemos tenido más próximos en el mundo político, o, por ejemplo, el debate, yo siendo americanista, yo hago historia de América, una historia que si la historia era inútil, la historia de América en nuestros currículos académicos eran aún más inútiles. Mis alumnos decían, ¿para qué tengo que estudiar historia de América si luego voy a ser profesor de secundaria y voy a enseñar la historia contemporánea de España? Y yo decía, tienes razón, si es que realmente lo que van a aprender aquí no vale para nada. Perdón. Sí vale, pero la argumentación era muy sólida, ¿no? Cuando realmente en el debate político español, de repente, la cuestión del imperio, de los imperios, de la imperiofobia, de la imperiofilia, el discurso de la reivindicación nacionalista del pasado español como un punto de gloria. Nosotros no fuimos colonizadores ni conquistadores, fuimos evangelizadores y civilizadores. Discurso pronunciado por un eminente historiador en el año 2014, el director de Radio Televisión Española, puesto a dedo por Mariano Rajoy, hizo este discurso historiográfico fabuloso, pero que nos demuestra un poquitín la importancia que de repente los discursos históricos tienen en la sociedad, ¿no? Entonces, por eso hay que replantearse un poquitín nuestra labor como historiadores. El problema es que nosotros como historiadores profesionales, el mundo de la academia, tenemos una cosa que se llama ANECA, que se llama Unequal. ANECA es una agencia evaluadora de calidad española. Entonces el gobierno vasco dijo, nosotros no somos españoles, hacemos nuestra propia agencia y hemos copiado las mismas técnicas, las mismas prácticas nefastas, en las cuales, por ejemplo, si yo publico un artículo en la Banana Historical Review, en inglés, por supuesto, en Estados Unidos, un artículo que me van a leer 15 personas que trabajan sobre historia de las bananas, pues me van a dar muchos puntos, me subirán el sueldo y podré pagar la hipoteca. Pero, sin embargo, si me dedico a hacer cosas como, por ejemplo, hice hace unos días, comenzó esta semana, a dar una conferencia en mi pueblo hablando sobre interpretaciones históricas del pasado de una zona cercana a gente que no son ni alumnos ni historiadores, sino simplemente vecinos de mi pueblo como yo, se conozco, pues eso no solamente no sirve para nada, sino me dice, usted está haciendo divulgación, y me pone una mancha, y no me dan la subida de sueldo y no puedo pagar la hipoteca. Bueno, pues esa es la cosa, ¿no? Es decir, pues es lo mismo que lo del el cáncer. Yo puedo crear la cura del cáncer, yo puedo crear, puedo hacer investigaciones históricas importantísimas, novedosas, que dan luz sobre, o pretenden dar luz, o al menos abrir un debate sobre el pasado, y sin embargo yo, elementos tan importantes que tienen que ver con la función social de la historia, como son la divulgación o la educación, pues son menospreciados. Por eso estoy aquí de moderador, pero estoy de oyente, y sobre todo de oyente muy interesado, porque estamos hablando, vamos a hablar un día de una apelación sobre esa parte del trabajo de historiador que es tan importante, aunque nos quieran decir o enseñar que no lo es, ¿no? Porque realmente hoy vamos a hablar sobre eso, sobre una de las funciones sociales de la historia, su uso en la como decían Juan Bautista Alberdi, un argentino, cuando hablaba de educación en el siglo XIX, decía que es importante la educación pública porque es el modo de educar al soberano. Pues es la idea, ¿no? Efectivamente, la historia tiene una función social, porque tiene una función política y porque está en los debates. Entonces, lo que hacen los historiadores no puede, no debe quedarse en nuestra pequeña academia, en las pequeñas revistas que publicamos, la Banana Historical Review, o si queremos hacerlo algo más próximo, hacemos la, no sé, iba a decir la Patata Company por aquello de Álava, perdón Alberto, pero es que no me salió otra idea, ¿no? Es decir, tenemos que difundirla. Y esto es lo interesante, ¿no? Por eso el tema de hoy, que tienen, como ven el título de Didáctica, decolonial de esta historia, pues creo que es una apelación muy interesante a esa labor que yo también hago, como nosotros, porque yo también soy educador en ese sentido, soy enseñante, yo enseño historia en la universidad, yo estoy formando esas personas que luego van a enseñar historia en las escuelas. Entonces, también es una reflexión, una apelación a mi propia actividad, a la que igual no daba tanta importancia, ¿no? Tanto, yo estoy aquí más que como moderador, voy a estar también como persona expectante para aprender de los ponentes que tenemos hoy, todos muy interesantes, pues esas reflexiones sobre esa epilabor del historiador, que es importante, a pesar de que cierto señor o señora de la NECA o el consejero de Educación del Gobierno vasco, hola, si me oye, soy yo, pues no toma en consideración que es esa labor importantísima. La sociedad nos paga a los historiadores y tenemos, bueno, nosotros no curamos el cáncer, pero sí podemos curar ciertos cánceres, como son pues esas malinterpretaciones de la historia que pueden llevar bueno, pues incluso a guerras, como estamos viendo ahora. Por lo tanto, yo ya he hablado mucho, voy a dejar que hablen los ponentes que tenemos hoy. Sí voy a comentarles un pequeño cambio en el horario y en el calendario de hoy. Si toman la sesión de hoy, verán que teníamos dos sesiones, una inicial que era esta de didáctica de la historia y la segunda que era sobre una reflexión general sobre globalización, un acto de clausura. Lamentablemente, Saskia Sassen, que era la ponente que iba a hablar de momento, no ha podido venir por razones personales. Y entonces, bueno, nos quedamos compuestos y sin novio, o sin novia, o sin lo que queramos. Pero, por suerte, hemos conseguido engañar a última hora a un especialista que también trabaja sobre educación, sobre didáctica y didáctica de la historia. Entonces, bueno, pues vamos a hacer una sesión alargada y creo que un debate aún más interesante y con más voces sobre esta cuestión. Por lo tanto, el planteamiento será como sigue, les adelanto para que tomen. Primero tendremos la sesión, como estaba prevista, de Sabine, la que presentaré ahora. Luego ella actuará como relatoría de las comunicaciones presentadas. Haremos una pausa café hacia las 11 más o menos, de 11 a 11 y media, y cuando volvamos tenemos la segunda conferencia de nuestro nuevo ponente Gonzalo Fernández, y a partir de ese momento yo invitaré a subir aquí a todos los de la mañana, participantes y ponentes y comunicantes, y para abrir un debate, que espero que sea sangriento en lo dialéctico, pero no en lo personal. Y bueno, pues sin más, voy a presentar, si me deja la máquina, porque veo que he perdido. Pues, he perdido, tenía la información tuya y la he perdido, así que necesito...
No pasa nada, puedo presentar yo también.
Pues mira, si me haces ese favor, porque somos historiadores, no somos tecnólogos, entonces...
No pasa nada.
Sabine Heiss es... me te voy a preguntar, ¿qué es esto de la Florida Universitaria, no, o sea, de Valencia? Porque yo cuando lo vi me quedé sorprendido.
¿Por qué se llama Florida?
Sí, porque se llama Florida.
Es una universidad que lleva ya 40 años en la enseñanza, empezó con formación profesional y ahora lleva como 25 años con ramas universitarias. Entonces es una universidad privada adscrita a la Universidad Politécnica de Valencia y la Universidad de Valencia,
Sí.
las dos públicas que tenemos en Valencia. Exacto, y entonces estoy trabajando allí de docente, tanto en los grados de magisterio, de infantil, de primaria, en el máster de enseñanza secundaria y también dando clases en lo que es innovación docente. Y mis antecedentes son que soy trabajadora social, pero también hice un máster en estudios interdisciplinarios de Latinoamérica, cual era toda una pasada maravillosa de aproximarnos de muchas perspectivas al continente americano. Y después hice en Sevilla el doctorado en ciencias sociales. Y esos son mis antecedentes profesionales. De resto vivo en Valencia, felizmente casada con una hija, y me dedico al pensamiento decolonial. Y sobre ello voy a hablar sobre todo en esta ocasión.
Pues, muchas gracias por darme aquí el trabajo.
Sí,
bueno,
encantada.
Pues, quedas a...
Y,
sí. Pues tienes allí el PowerPoint cuando quieras.
Sí, a ver
la
si
charla va a ser
funciona.
en inglés. Quien necesite traductor pues sabe que puede ponérselo y bueno, lo dejo en sus manos.
La PowerPoint, ¿cómo llego ahora a la PowerPoint? ¿El escape? Ah, no, está acá abajo.
Eso.
Ok, y lo pongo en pantalla
En
completa.
pantalla completa.
So,
Eso.
okay. Yes, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, Álvaro, especially Foundation Elkano'. Thank you very much for this. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I don't know if it's okay for you if I speak like this in English, if it's okay for you, and you can always have a look at the presentation on the slides. Well, my topic, or the title of this little presentation is European Colonial Expansion and its Legacy Today. It is about how the 500 years of history still have like power in the nowadays, and our structures and the way how we organize society. This is what I'm going to talk about. And there are very useful concepts of coloniality, which are the coloniality of being, the coloniality of knowledge, and the coloniality of power. And this is what we are going to highlight today. Of course, it will be just a really short insight to this decolonial theory and thinking. And let's start and have a look at it. And if you have questions, we can always chat together and talk, delve deeper later on. Well, first of all, we try to comprehend coloniality in this globalized society from a decolonial perspective. Why? Because it helps us. It is really based on a critical thought in relation to the modern colonial world system. It criticizes concepts such as modernity, progress, and development. This is like the origin. And it very much highlights the analysis of the established knowledge. You can see it on the right hand. We are knowledge makers, so it is so important for us and for the decolonial theory to think about where does knowledge come from, how it is constructed, and how it is reproduced or maybe transformed. This is what they are looking at very much. So, and we take up fundamental questions such as, what do we want to know when we do research? How do we know what we are going to research? How do we do it methodologically, for example? What for? He was telling about the origins of and the motivations of doing research. We all have very different motivations. But for whom are we doing research especially? Is it for us to get the points for Aneka? Or do we do it to have transformation and maybe emancipation and liberation in this society? This is the next question. Okay. So, you can see it here. To what extent does research or academia reproduce or transform the established power relations? And what am I doing inside this complex institution as academia, research, and education? This input will be really very structured. At first hand, I will give a little insight of the genealogy of decolonial perspective. Where does it come from? Next step would be decolonial critique. What are the claims they make, the foundation of their critique? What are the theories of invisibilization? We found out that it was really helpful to think about the theories of invisibilization when you think about coloniality. And the next thing would be to give some really short insights and how could be some pathways towards decoloniality. So these are the 4 points we are talking about. And I try to connect it with you in the sense you are a researcher, maybe you're doing some work, you are interested in history and research, and so the question for you maybe can be, what can this be helpful for me? Decolonial perspective, decolonial theory, maybe it can be helpful for my work that I'm doing. Maybe it can be helpful on a theoretical, on a methodological, or in a practical level for your work. So, first step, decolonial perspective. What is the genealogy? They say, like Felipe Guamán Poma was a chronicler, and he lived in Peru, especially in the 16th century, and he would be one of the foundationers of decolonial thinking. What is Platon and Aristotle for us, maybe here in the Occidental research community, for the decolonial theory, this would be one very important figure because he was writing down structures, relationships, relations of power inside the early year of colonialism. In the 16th and 17th century, he was published, and he was one of the persons who coined decolonial thinking. Another person would be Ottobah Cugoano. He himself is a slave born in Ghana, which nowadays would be Ghana. He was sold to the Americas. From there, he went to Britain or to the United Kingdom, where he started to write books and to be an abolitionist. He was one of the very important persons that published books like, for instance, Thoughts and Sentiments of the Evil of Slavery. So these two people, Guamán Poma and Ottobah Cugoano, would be like the founders of decolonial thinking. Okay. Nevertheless, there are a lot more of influences on decolonial perspective. For example, the philosophy of liberation. You know that it's originated in Latin America, especially related to also Enrique Dussel. And the next point would be dependency theory, like the peripheries and the center parts of the world. Dependency theory looked very much on this part of the relations between periphery and center. They also are very much influenced by Marxist and Weberian thesis. The next thing would be maybe the work of Michel Foucault and Pierre Bourdieu. They are highly influenced, very much influenced of Michel Foucault and his power theories, especially the hierarchical power theory that he claimed. And Pierre Bourdieu, when it comes to symbolic violence, for example, in education, and this would be very interesting for you, maybe Amaya, and later on we can get back to that. They are very much obviously influenced also by the post-colonial studies, which are come from India, from Asia. You know, there were the subaltern studies group in Asia, and there was, at the same time, there was the Latin American subaltern studies group. So it was like a movement from both continents, more in Asia and more in Latin America. And at the end, decolonial theory especially is about Latin America or America and 500 years of colonialization, and not like the post-colonial theory, which is more focused on the Indian subcontinent and on 300 years, 250 years of colonialism. This would be the difference. And the next very important input comes from the world system theory from Immanuel Wallerstein. So this is also a composition of influences and foundation of decolonial theory. Here are some, I wanted to show you some faces, like people who are behind that ideas and who are really trying to build up more rigorous theory about decoloniality. Walter Mignolo, Santiago Castro Gomez, Catherine Walsh, Freya Shivi, Euderkis Espinosa, Brenny Mendoza, Ochi Curiel, Arturo Escobar. All of them are more or less specialized on a certain part of decolonial theory. All good, Anwar? Okay. So, for example, Brenny Mendoza, Ochi Curiel, and Yuderquis Espinosa, they are feminist decolonial thinkers. They have a really different, all of them are coming from a very different background. When you look at Arturo Escobar, he comes from Colombia as well as Santiago Castro Gomez, and Santiago Castro Gomez is very, very much more inside on the discursive construction of coloniality. Arturo Escobar is much more suggesting things related to development theory and decoloniality. That's his topic, more or less. Okay. And so on. This is very, very interesting because they are obviously they are not always at the same conviction. They have struggles inside. Is it everything okay? Okay, just a little bit. Okay. Aquí abajo. Sí. Technical. So that's it. Okay, what is really, really different to what we think and learn in educational systems in the West? A really, really big difference is that decolonial thinkers claim that modernity and coloniality come up at the same time. So they are really not only in a relation, but they are constitutive. One thing is constitutive to the other. That means they say coloniality is the other side of one coin. So modernity wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have coloniality at the same time. If you stay with this idea that is one side of a coin, and it's really it's so interconnected that you can't split it, and it happens at the same time. That is their claim. It is really different. So they say in 1492, modernity started at the same time as coloniality started. This would be a really big difference of conceiving things in history also. When the decolonial thought also emerged at the very foundation of modernity and coloniality as a counterpart. So we can say it's not only decolonial theory that started maybe in the 16th, 17th century, but it started already as a movement when the colonizers arrived at Americas. There was already resistance, and this would be understood as also a counterpart of development practice, of the decolonial practice, sorry. And now it does not work anymore. I could. No, now it does not switch anymore. The next slide. Now, okay, all fine, sorry. Sorry. So, what role does modernity play? You know that very much better than I do, obviously, because you are you work on history, and I just have some small insights in what I'm telling you. But if we imagine Europe in the 15th or 16th century, of course, it was initial of racial differences in Western Europeans. They were the external others, because suddenly there arrived people who were not there from their region. They were born in other places, they looked differently, so we have the racial difference and the so-called external others. At the same time, we already had the internal others because of their religious differences, like the Jews, los Sephardos, and so on. All these people who had other religions and was not the Christian one. So we had these internal others, these external others. We needed to form categories, especially sociology. When it came up, they had a very significant role in how these categories were made up. And that's why with the European colonial expansion, these social categories, they recently emerged. They did not exist before. We needed to put people in a box, and we put a little label on it. And these labels would be like the primitive and the civilized. We had to put this dichotomy in categories to be very harsh and maybe very, very limited. And these boxes still exist. Not only the primitive and the civilized, it is the difference between irrational and the rational, like the rational European and the irrational, like the primitive. We made up the new difference between doxa and science. Doxa would be all that is not considered well enough to be part of academia, for example. We made a huge difference between traditional and modern. And also later on, in the 20th century already with Truman, we started to talk about development and the underdeveloped. The developed societies and the underdeveloped societies is still so significant in our societies. And of course, we made up categories like European and non-European. They are made up categories. They are constructed and invented. That's the important thing. Very, very, very important is also that it is a discursive construction. And that's where the colonial theory makes the emphasis. They say it was needed. We needed this discursive construction in order to spread our power. So they say, without the construction of these categories, the invasion and the exploitation wouldn't have been able, and modernity and coloniality wouldn't have happened. Yes? So the discursive dimension of knowledge regimes is a really important point that they put a focus on. How realities are created. Okay. Nowadays they say there are still these organizing principles of societies. It does not matter if it is in a little territory, if it is a nation, or if it is a country, if it is globally talking. Societies are structured by these intertwined global hierarchies. They are interrelated. They are organizing structures such like language. There are linguistic differences between European and non-European languages. I am talking in English right now, even though this is not my first language, but it is seen as it's more international congress probably if somebody speaks in English. So we need this legitimacy of speaking in this recognized language. It's a European language, of course, and then I'm using it to give it like, maybe it is thought that it is more international when I'm speaking English. Maybe. I could do this in Spanish too, or in German, or in Valenciano. I speak a little bit Valenciano too. Or I can do it in my dialect from my home country. But this is not so important. It's like what Óscar says about, you can do something, but maybe it is not the recognition. So you can see this little circle, linguistic differentiation between European and non-European languages. There's a huge part of it, a very important part is gender differences. So we are also structured, it depends if we are a woman, if we are a man, if we are intersex, it depends so much, and they are crossing through us. These dimensions are crossing through us as a subject, and it puts us in a higher level or in a lower level in societies. So this would be the difference. Obviously there are another principle that would be the sexuality one. There's a primacy to heterosexual over homosexuals. This still, even though we have got laws that allow people to get married and so on, but that they needed the recognition of a state and of law, and to fight for it, for this transformation. Obviously, we have a hierarchy between the religious and the spiritualities. It gives still primacy to the Christianity over all these kind of non-Christian spiritualities. And the most influential would be the epistemic one. No? It privileges Western knowledge over all other kinds of knowledges. And there are many, many, many knowledges that we have, but we are still giving more privileges to the Western knowledge. Okay? And so on. And another important one, the racial and ethical privileges. The Europeans are very much more recognized in academia especially. And when you come from Europe, I guess it would be the question, why am I here and not somebody else? what privileged me to stand here and not somebody else, for example. I'm the white European woman and with all my academic baggage, so on. So, and we could ask why is not another person here standing and talking to you, maybe. So these are the intertwined global hierarchies, and the Greek researcher coined the term heterarchies. It refers to they are heterogeneous and hierarchical. So jerárquico y heterogéneo is put together in one word. There are multiple hierarchies inside there. Quijano calls it a historical heterogeneous structure that influences all of us as subjects. This is the famous triangle of coloniality. Coloniality of power would be a global pattern of power that leads to social ranking. You can imagine it as the globe, the earth, is like a matrix that is around this globe. A global pattern of power leading to social ranking. It's a hierarchization of social relations. The next thing would be the coloniality of being, or la colonialidad de ser. It's at the beginning, this is again something that you know a lot better than I do, but it was the denial of the not civilized indigenous people in the Americas, the denial of subjectivity at the beginning of colonialization, of the colonial expansion. Nowadays, coloniality of being would be understand that all of us, globally talking, all human beings are subjugated in this logic, in this function of capitalism. We are all working, thinking, living in this idea of capitalism. We are colonized, all of us. That would be the other idea. And now the coloniality of knowledge. This is a more complex thing. When we talk about coloniality of knowledge, it's what we said before. It's the predominance of Western knowledge and ideas. And it's also the colonial production of knowledge. We are very much fixed in this way of how to produce knowledge, what are the standards, what is legitimized, what is still seen as doxa, and what is seen as recognized in academia. Spivak, relating to Foucault, calls this the epistemic violence. Epistemic violence because it keeps out other knowledges. And it's not just a choice of ignoring it, it is really an active leaving it out of academia. So this is a big difference. It's not just ignored or not seen or invisibilized. It is really held out of academia, the other knowledge. This is the difference. And Mignolo calls it also epistemic racism of modernity. To understand a little better how do this work, we can use the term invisibilization. This is very much comes from the Frankfurt School. So it is the critical theory from Frankfurt School, especially of Axel Honneth, which was the ex-director of this center. And we can distinguish between physical or material invisibility at first hand, and it would be the exclusion of people from hegemonic public spaces. This is an exclusion very easy. We have got our frontiers, we have got our boundaries, we have got our segregation also in school system. We keep people out from certain spaces, physically, materially. We keep them out. And that's why subjects are excluded from public discourses. There's another form of invisibilization. If you think about the articles you read in newspapers or also in other publications, mostly the discourse about immigration is not with immigrants, but people who are talking about immigrants. So this is another way of physical or material invisibility. They are not taking part in the public notion, in the public discourse. The people who they are talking about are maybe experts from the university or whatever, from NGOs, but mostly they are not taking part people which are really immigrants. So there's another way of invisibilization, and this will be a direct interaction of and relationship between two and more participants of the interaction, this interaction disappears. And it's a little bit more complex. For example, this shirt I'm wearing, somebody produced it in certain conditions. So our way of consuming in the West, our way of traveling, our way of living, our way of using, for example, patinetes eléctricos, all this, we need the batteries, and batteries have got materials that have to be gained in the Sierra de Atacama in Chile, for example. And this is a huge influence that we can't see because there are these structures. Large systems of structures are disappearing, are making invisible the relation that exists between the people who are living in the Sierra de Atacama in the north of Chile and Bolivia, and somebody who's using un patinete eléctrico. You know, there is a relationship, but we are invisibilizing this relationship. I'm sorry. See, that's what's happened. Now another form of invisibilization would be the social invisibilization. The other is visible, understandable, but has another validity. For example, we can have in our classroom a lot of immigrants, we can have people from somewhere else, we can have a lot of women, we can have people with disabilities, we can have all kinds of diversity in our classroom, for example. But nevertheless, being there physically does not mean that their point of view or what they are saying has the same visibility as the other one. Axel Honneth talks about micro-racism, for example. We are looking through somebody. Somebody is there physically, but we are just more or less ignoring this person and what he or she or it is saying. That would be social invisibilization. Rebecca Solnit coined the term mansplaining. This is exactly what she is referring to when she talks about the invisibilization of women. They are there, but they are ignored. Or part of that, what they're saying, has not the same validity as what a man is saying, mansplaining. Honneth says it's coined the term direct disrespect to talk about this. It's ignoring or neglecting somebody who is present. Okay, and to sum up, bottom line, it's a mechanism that prevents the other's normative demands from being heard or perceived in communicative settings. In this community, we do have here a communicative setting, but right now, I think that I am in the power structure, in our logics of how to create communicative settings. We are standing here, you are sitting there, there are really big limits, and the communications setting. Okay, sorry, she couldn't hear me there. So this is the demands are not heard because they can't take part physically or they can't take part socially in the communicative settings. And these demands are ignored or neglected. So what can we do with all that? This was just the critique, the decolonial critique related to invisibility theories, and what we are trying to do now would be find some ways towards decoloniality. First of all, our job could be and can be visibilizing the invisible structuring logics and their origins. That means what we were saying, the coloniality of knowledge, being, and power, we can talk about that. It exists and it is part of everyday life and of our life too. We can visibilize the structures that come into play when we are in how we consume the clothes, the patinete eléctrico and all that stuff, you know. We can just put it in a visible plan. Especially we can apply a global perspective on power hierarchies. A lot of research is concentrating on one certain territory, for example, on certain logics, but they are all interconnected. Decolonial thinkers say coloniality or the expansion, the European expansion, colonial expansion, affected all countries, all territories. Nevertheless, they were colonizer or colonized. Even if you were not colonized or colonizer as a country, it affected all of us. There is no way of getting out of these logics, even if you are coming from Sweden, Switzerland, or wherever. There's no way of getting out of these structures. So it is think globally. So I think this was a topic of the last 2 days, also globalization. And as we are in the academia, we are active part of academia, we can trying to decolonize academia too. We can criticize and visibilize coloniality from within the institutional framework. We can identify the colonial dimension of Western theoretical analytical perspectives. We are obviously part of the coloniality of knowledge. It was that we had to universalize it. It was the expansion of colonial ideas were a power strategy. I have got a friend in Chile. She comes from Temuco, which is like 800 kilometers away from Santiago, more or less, right? She studied sociology too. What did she learn? In her first year of the degree, she learned Weber, Marx, Foucault, Durkheim. The same thing. So it was a universalization of the knowledge as a strategy, a power strategy. At the same time as it was exported and universalized, of course, we had to devalue all other knowledges. So it's really short now. It's always just a little part of it that we can see, because we are so concentrated on Western knowledge production that it is impossible to think in other dimensions. For example, Western knowledge is so anthropological. It's so anthrocentric, anthropocentrical. We are just focusing on the human being, and we never think about other livings, like nature, animals, whatever. So this is something that it limits interpretation and understanding of complex phenomena. We need to open gates, I would say. I just wanted to cite also Catherine Welch. She makes a difference. Decolonizing, sometimes D is associated to something, to demake something, to unmake something, but it's not like that. In Spanish, it would not mean to undo coloniality or colonialism, because it's impossible. You can't undo it. It is there. But what we can do is we can disarm, undo, and reversing the colonial. It does not mean disarming, the undoing, or reversing, but rather to identify, make visible, and encourage places of exteriority and alternative constructions of knowledge also, for example, to make it more visible. This is a friend of ours. He's called Dennis Pouridem. He comes from Ghana, and he has a PhD from Denmark University. And he says decolonization is not universal. We cannot import discourse studies wholesale in every country. We had a happening about decolonizing discourse studies, and he said it's impossible. You can't use these Western ideas of discourse studies in my context. We have to adapt them. We can use strategies, but then we have to adapt them on our context. It has to be contextualized, first of all. And nevertheless, an idea towards decoloniality would be the idea of epistemic decolonization. In what sense? It would be transcending epistemologically. As we said, it was universalized and it was neglected other knowledge. Now the idea would be to open spaces of university and transcending epistemologically, extending the Western canon of epistemology by the subalternized. Subalternized is really the act of devaluing. So it would be inverse this act of unvalue other knowledges and give it certain value. We as academia can think and do decoloniality. We know that this global modern order exists. As you remember, the intertwined dimensions that organize all our societies. We can actively change discourses about how to do and think, how to interpret, what we use. Another friend, Flavia from Brazil, she says, for me, the work of decolonization is first about dismantling white supremacy. Dismantling white supremacy, this is really a hard thing. You would say maybe, well, how can we dismantle white supremacy? It exists. It is all over and it is there. Actually, all of us here inside this room, I think we are white Europeans, maybe only except Gonzalo, which is from Latin America, right? No? Exactly. What would she do? What do people suggest towards decoloniality? like Jamila Ribeiro and Donna Haraway, they coined the term evidencing the locus of enunciation. In this geopolitics of knowledge, Santiago Castro Gomez talks about geopolitics of knowledge. And she says, well, it is very much important to get this shift towards decoloniality to pronounce our locus of enunciation. Where do I come from? What is my epistemological background? Where am I talking from? Where do I come from? To visibilize my locus of enunciation. What brought me here? And what makes it possible that I'm standing here? This would be part of our research and of our publications, of our papers, to announce the locus of enunciation. Exactly. And she says, sometimes we stand there in the limit and say, oh man, but what can I do? What can I do as a European researcher? And she says, well, if you don't know what to do, just give structures to those who do know what to do. And there are a lot of people outside of academia who do know what to do in order to decolonize global societies. Okay. Another good, fantastic idea from Castro Gomez, Walsh, and Shivi. There's a book that it was a conference, and this conference was only thinking about and focusing on how can we indiscipline social sciences, indisciplinar las ciencias sociales, indisciplinarlas, open disciplines, just open our views, get connected with other ways of thinking, other disciplines, other parts of the same university maybe that you are inside. Think more complex, more interrelated in social sciences. Ramon Grossvogel coined very much the idea of creating a common critical language of decolonization. This would be a political process of resignification, a critical language of decolonization. For example, if you are doing research, who is the subject, who is the object? Do you think about an object that you are studying to get known something about this object, or are there two subjects who are getting into contact? Are you a subject as a researcher, and the people who is researched, are they subjects or objects for you? This would be a question everybody of us can just think about. In decolonial theory, obviously, they would say that this subject-object relations limits us. There can't be a dialogue if we think about an object that we are studying. It would be two how do you say that? Fuentes de información. Two subjects that get interrelated in a research process. So it's methodologically talking about the design of a research can be very different when I think about a subject and a subject that getting interrelated. Okay? Farah is working at the University of Sydney, and she says, listen, really listen to those who have been hurt and subjugated. I think this would be a very easy step to do and a difficult at the same time. We mostly have so much talking, so much, we have to say so much, but she says listen, just really listen. Listen to identify and integrate subalternized and emerging knowledge. Discuss research practices. Integrate other things in your publication. Do think about what is the product of my investigation. Is it just for the library? Is it just for the paper? What other way of product of investigation can I create with the rest of people? This would be very, very difficult. And she suggests us to rethink the modern colonial world from the perspective of the colonial difference. The colonial difference is very much coined the term by Grossvogel, Walter Mignolo, and a lot of these theorists. They say the colonial difference would be the subjects that have been subjugated in any way of these logics that structures our societies. So work and talk and live with people from the colonial difference. Contrary to what a lot of research is doing, which is called extractivism, it would be to be committed, politically committed in your research project. This is just, Daniel Fosro is a Mapuche member, the community in the south of Chile and Argentina. And he says, we don't want you to come here to investigate us, and then you take our knowledge to your library, you put it there, and you public, and then you get the points for your institutions and so on. We don't want this anymore. Stay where you are, or work with us and fight with us in our fight for recognition as a minority group. And an example of this, how to do it differently, would be what is Silvia Rivera Cusiganqui from Bolivia is doing. They made up a methodology which is called TOA, Taller de Historia Oral Andina. This is just like a guide how other methodologies would be possible to work with people to create history. Also, when it comes to how do we do his history, how do we do research on history? This would be another methodological way to do it. TOA. Here, there's all a list of what can be methodologically being changed towards decoloniality. There are a lot of publications, and I wanted to highlight Xochitl Leiva and Shannon Speed, because they have a beautiful work done where they reflect on how difficult it is to change our ways of designing research and put it into practice. And I learned a lot with them, for example. And all the other one, Gloria Ansaldúa especially, she's talking about the borderlands and the hybrid spaces of borderlands and so on. Out of this list, I wanted to take the first one. What is normally, where does the research question of your research comes from? What is the origin of the research question? This idea comes from Rita Laura Segato, she's from Argentina. And she's asking that, where does your research question comes from? From your desktop, when you are sitting there alone, or where does it come from? Or does it maybe come from a community? Does it come really from the people of you that surround you? Does it come from maybe a minority group? Where does this research questions come from, and why do we do research? That would be the next question. And I think this, personally speaking, this really made me doubt a lot what I was doing there at the university, because obviously I was sitting alone at my desktop and I was thinking about, maybe with my mentor, what can I do? What can be the research question of my investigation? I don't know if this happens to you too, but to me it happened. So, and the next pool, maybe I can ask myself, is this research a tool for liberation or emancipation? Just remember that all decolonial theory is defined as a critical theory. Critical theory always have normative claims, or they claim normatively that we have to transform society, because as we are right now living, we don't want it anymore. So it's a normative claim in the critical theory, and decolonial theory is a critical theory. So we can ask ourselves, what we are doing, does it lead us to transform, to emancipation, to liberation, or not? I don't know if this is so important thing for historians. I don't know. Yes? Okay. Good. Very practical too. Catherine Walsh is the editor of 2 really wonderful compilations of research experiences. Then you can have a look at it. I don't think that we'll delve deeper in that, because we are running out of time, but this is, if you want to have a look at the library, to these 2 beautiful publications. And now it's more about ourselves, what we can think ourselves. To what extent does your research practice contribute to the maintenance of coloniality, of knowledge, being, and power in your field, or maybe to the reproduction of theories or methods? Maybe it helps to transform, to liberate, to emancipate, or does it still reproduce the established power relations? And if we want to find ways out of producing and reproducing the established knowledge, I can ask myself, what is my epistemological, ontological, methodological, or didactic position as a researcher? Which texts do I use? What is in my library? Who writes these texts? Where is the point that this person speaks from? Epistemologically thinking, territorially thinking, where does this person speak from? How do you suffer the prejudices or enjoy privileges of raciality? I enjoy a lot of privileges just for the fact of being white. Maybe I don't have so much privileges in some spaces because I am not what somebody expected, but as a logic of how relations are structured, a white European woman has certainly another privilege than a woman coming from Senegal, even though she was a sociologist, probably. So, how do you position yourself in relation to the local production of knowledge? Do you have any connections to communities, to social movements? Are you politically involved in something? We can ask ourselves that. What are possible limitations in understanding what am I researching? I am so much formed and educated in talking and listening. Maybe I don't have another access to experiences. So this would be the next question. I'm limited. My point of view and my way of understanding and interpreting the world will be always limited, very much limited. So I need to expand ways of thinking with other people and through other people. So, and then the very last question, as we are talking about a critical theory, how do you think the knowledge generated in research can be emancipatory and why? And this is it. Thank you very much. And I guess now would be time for Amaya, Unai, Isidoro. Perfect. No, not yet. Not yet. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias por la intervención muy sugerente. Como han visto, yo me he puesto en el público como Rometí, porque he estado tomando notas y para no molestar la visión también. Bien, además de ponente, a Sabine se le encargó por parte de la organización que fuera también la relatora de las 3 comunicaciones que se habían presentado hoy. Entonces, ella ahora nos va a presentar cuáles son sus planteamientos, cuestiones, críticas sobre estas comunicaciones. Entonces, los autores de las comunicaciones pues aconsejo que tomen notas de lo que haya, porque luego en el debate, que será posterior a la última presentación, pues será cuando puedan responder o puedan plantear sus propias contrarréplicas o sus críticas o entrar en debate. Entonces, ¿saben?
Yo solo ahora comento, ¿ellos no vienen aquí arriba?
Luego vienen.
Luego. Ok, vale. Vale. He leído, obviamente, los 3 textos, aunque han sido los resúmenes de las, entiendo que son vuestras investigaciones que estáis en la actualidad llevando a cabo o iniciando, como es el caso de Unai, que me comentó que está iniciando con su proceso. Quizás justo con Unai me gustaría iniciar, pero más que nada porque creo que necesitaría yo ampliar mi conocimiento en lo que atañe la historia a la cual aludes en tu texto, ¿no? Yo entendí que estás trabajando con el término y el concepto de la diferencia y de diferentes tipos de diferencias. Yo, para ser honesta, creo que lo conectaría yo con la construcción de la otredad que tenía yo de ese pensamiento decolonial, mucho como se han construido y creado discursivamente las diferencias y las otredades para... Por ejemplo, en la teoría decolonial, la idea de los europeos se podían construir, necesitaba al otro para posicionarse a sí mismo. La construcción del otro tiene la función de ponerse y crearse como pueblo europeo. También era imprescindible los incivilizados, los subdesarrollados y los bárbaros para crearse a uno mismo como civilizado, avanzado y racional. Creo que con estos conceptos probablemente te puede ayudar mucho pensar en lo de la otredad. Eso se ha trabajado en 1000 autores, también Derrida, Foucault, etc. Mucho lo trabaja también Ramón Grossvogel, que es uno de los pensadores decoloniales. Y lo que no me quedó muy claro a veces han sido las partes cuando hablas de lo que es nuestra historia. Y creo que ese autoposicionamiento, quizás lo que estábamos hablando, en lugar de la enunciación de ti mismo como investigador, pero también cuando hablas de nuestro, ¿qué sería allí el lugar de enunciación? Quizás te puede servir ese pensamiento. Porque también tú estás inmerso en un complejo sistema de relaciones de poder, formas parte de la universidad, estás metido en ello, y de ahí, ¿desde dónde hablas tú también? Epistemológicamente hablando, teóricamente hablando, metodológicamente hablando, y cuáles son los textos que vas a usar tú para arrojar luz sobre el fenómeno. Lo que te quería consultar, más bien, por eso yo creo que lo había malentendido, que yo pensaba que voy a tener más un diálogo ya con los tres.
Tenemos luego diálogo.
Sí, sí, genial. ¿Y cuál sería el vacío de conocimiento de tu proyecto de investigación? Me interesaría. ¿Cuál sería también el origen de tu pregunta de investigación? ¿De dónde se origina esta inquietud que quieres sacar adelante en tu proyecto de investigación? Y sí, la otredad como mecanismo de poder e invisibilidad, creo que eso te podría ser súper útil. Vale. Y luego seguimos hablando Unai sobre ello. Sí. Isidoro, muchas gracias, que eso ha sido más que nada un aprendizaje para mí misma, tu comentario sobre las relaciones hispano-portuguesas y la especiería de la corte de la emperatriz Isabel. Yo, obviamente, de la Isabel, yo la conozco no de persona tampoco, no, claro, tú tampoco, pero me arrojé un poquito más conocimiento sobre ella gracias a tus palabras, y creo que lo que me vino a la mente es sobre todo que ella fue un sujeto clave a la hora de exportar las estructuras sociales, culturales, económicas y políticas a las Américas. O sea, ella como sujeto individual de poder pudo tener tantísima influencia en esa idea de la exportación de las estructuras europeas, porque a la larga los sistemas políticos, sociales, económicos se mantuvieron a pesar de la descolonización de los territorios y de la creación de las naciones y todo lo que tú no quieras. Estos sistemas se exportaron, y también se exportó un sistema discursivo, y quizás esta parte me hubiera interesado saber también cómo ha influenciado el discurso político y de construcción de sujetos por parte de Isabela. Cómo quizás se ve reflejado en la actualidad todavía en las Américas. Eso me interesaría mucho. Cómo al final quizás también invisibilizan las relaciones de poder entre norte-sur, y los nortes en el sur y los sures en el norte, desde el discurso de la emperadora. ¿Cuáles han sido sus discursos y cómo se han exportado, y qué es todavía el legado de esta figura súper poderosa en la actualidad en los sures del norte y los nortes del sur? Exacto, la figura del poder, eso eran mis apuntes que he sacado ahí, sobre todo, tanto en el plano local como global, puede ser súper interesante. Sí, y luego seguimos también, Isidoro, seguramente aprendo más de vosotros que cualquier cosa. Okay. Amaya, eso, claro, ahí me surgen mil y unas ideas que podríamos, yo creo que al siguiente trabajo lo hacemos juntas, si quieres, ¿no? Porque tú planteas un poquito cómo en la actualización, la primera vuelta al mundo y los inicios de la globalización, cómo se plasman hoy en día en las aulas de la educación, como en la vida real, en los centros educativos, lo que tengo entendido de tu trabajo, ¿no? Y plantea sobre todo que estamos bastante esclavizadas en el etnocentrismo también, o en el eurocentrismo más que nada. Eso es la misma crítica fuerte del pensamiento decolonial, el eurocentrismo, y creo que le añadiría también el etnocentrismo. Lo hemos mencionado previamente, pero estamos tan ligados solamente a pensar en los sujetos y en el hombre y la mujer, o sea, en en el humano, que dejamos de lado las otras partes. Si introducimos en las aulas, si queremos introducir en las aulas también el pensamiento decolonial, abarcaría también el más conocimiento sobre los afectos y los legados de la colonización en un plano más bien de la naturaleza, del medio ambiente, estos elementos que no quedarían fuera. Okay. Y me encantó esa parte, como que se sigue aún, aunque ha habido una transformación, digamos, en los currículums, sigue habiendo lo que se llamaría, según lo que yo sepa, el currículum null, las cosas que se dejan de fuera. Oculto creo que es más el aprendizaje intencionado, pero no escrito en los documentos, pero el null sería la violencia epistémica, de la cual habla Spivak, de la cual habla Bourdieu. La violencia sistémica en el currículum, no tanto oculto, sino en este caso null, que se deja intencionalmente fuera. Esa selección de los contenidos del currículum, eso es un instrumento político muy fuerte, desde luego. Y aparte de hablar ya y integrar otros conocimientos, quizás, creo que iría aún más allá. Y me acordé de una publicación que hicieron también en Colombia sobre los libros de texto y de los siglos XVIII a XIX más o menos, donde aparecía una fuerte marca o impronta, podríamos decir, de reproducir los estereotipos coloniales, donde se plasmaban, se visualizaban a los colonizados desde la inferioridad y para otra vez entrar en este juego de la otredad. Y es un estudio súper bonito, donde se fijaron solo en libros de textos, y eso en Colombia, no estamos ni hablando del territorio europeo ni nada, sino cómo ahí se puede dar a conocer cómo se plasmó la idea y se ha integrado, los colonizados también han integrado esa relación establecida entre los colonos y los colonizados, de la cual hablaba sobre todo, ¿cómo se llamaba? Frantz Fanon. Frantz Fanon puede ser súper útil, creo que también allí en ese caso. ¿Y qué más quería decir? Los otros olvidados mencionaste tú, yo creo que no son olvidados, fíjate tú, ahí quería hacer hincapié en eso, que esos realmente son ninguneados. Se han ninguneado a los otros actores, y si aparecen, son los que hemos visto como la invisibilización social. Están allí, pero son negados. El desprecio del cual habla Honneth podría ser, creo que un concepto bastante útil para seguir trabajando la parte de los otros olvidados, o más bien invisibilizados, ninguneados, despreciados. Y claro, como docentes, aquí nosotras mismas estamos metidas en esa labor, ¿no? ¿Qué hacemos entre la investigación histórica y enseñanza de la historia en las aulas? Ahí creo que sí, para mí es clave seguir colaborando, aprendiendo las unas de las otras, ampliando nuestras propias perspectivas por las que no hemos visto hasta ahora. Trabajar mucho más de forma indisciplinada, es decir, entre varias disciplinas y entre varias comunidades, dejar las fronteras de la Universidad de la Torre de Marfil, meternos en las comunidades, preguntar qué es la necesidad de las comunidades locales, el contacto con lo que nos rodea, y sacar de allí y hacernos más bien como ofertar desde el conocimiento y las metodologías científicas, ofertar nuestro servicio a las comunidades existentes y sus reclamaciones y luchas políticas. Y con eso me quedo así. Gracias. A vosotros tres también mucho.
Muchas gracias, Sabine. Quedan preguntas en el aire. Les recuerdo que los resúmenes de los textos estaban en el cuaderno que se os ha entregado, sobre lo que se ha hecho esta reflexión. Yo creo que han quedado cuestiones ahí muy claras. Los tres comunicantes imagino que han apuntado bien cuáles son las cuestiones, porque luego cuando estén invitados a la mesa podremos debatir sobre ello. Y bueno, con un poquito de adelanto, pero como dijo una doctoranda a la que hace mucho tiempo dirigí, Es tarde, estamos todos cansados y un buen café nos vendría muy bien. Así que, bueno, pues ahora saben que tenemos el café en este sitio tan bonito que tenemos al lado. Los que estén online, lamentablemente, no podrán hacerlo, pero seguro que en casa podrán tomar algo. Y volvemos aquí a las 11:30 para la segunda ponencia del día y luego el debate abierto sobre estas cuestiones y otras que se susciten entre la mesa y con el público. Gracias.